Forms by Adobe session. In this session, I would like to make you understand one of the important requirements, or maybe we can understand in a way of one of the important developments that we are going to usually come across in the Adobe development environment, is that integrating Adobe Forms with webdynpro application. Probably this would be called as an online application, where the business users would be trying to access this Adobe form by using using a kind of application where this application can be integrated or can be embedded into a NetView portal. And by making use of this service, whatever that has been defined within the NetView portal, they'll be trying to access the service, and finally once they see the application, the application can be embedded with Adobe form, where the business users can start making use of this Adobe form to insert the data, whatever that they are looking at, for a specific process. And finally, upon completion of the process, they can just submit this data back to the database. They can just commit the work or whatever that they have just tried to fill, or it can be something like they can just try to trigger a kind of event, or they can start a workflow where this Adobe form can be sent as an attachment to the workflow or to the next level users, where they can just go through the Adobe form and they can just start validating the form. And if in case everything looks fine with the respect to the data and validations, they can just go ahead and commit the work or the data into the database. So in this process, there are three things that we have to understand as about how to integrate this webdynpro application, how to integrate this Adobe form into a webdynpro application, and next to that, how we can make use of this Adobe form can act as an offline Adobe form. We call it as offline scenario and online scenarios. Basically, when you try to integrate Adobe Forms with a webdynpro application, probably you will be coming across two different kinds of scenarios. One would be online scenario and one would be offline scenario. When we talk about online scenario, it's very simple. The Adobe form will be integrated within the webdynpro application, and the users will try to insert the data and they commit the work. If in case it's an offline scenario, the business users might include the information and they save a copy of this Adobe form onto their desktop, which is integrated with the webdynpro application. And later, at some point of time, these business users can come back and open the form which was saved on their desktop, and they can just again start filling the form from the point where they left. So in order to handle these scenarios, we have to understand three things. One is how to integrate Adobe Forms with webdynpro application. Next, looking at online scenario, how we can transmit this data from one user to another user. And the third scenario, the third thing is that if in case the user saves the data, the form into the offline onto his desktop, so whether the data remains within the Adobe form or not. So in this process, maybe I would like to take you through all the steps. How do we integrate this? And in the process, I'll also make you understand how we can integrate Adobe form within, or how we can embed Adobe form in a webdynpro application. So to do that, the first thing is that we are supposed to create a webdynpro application. So in this session, I would like to make you understand how we can embed Adobe form into a webdynpro application. And in the next session, I would like to take you through how we can define the events that are once we place some sort of buttons on the Adobe form, and how we can how we can make the webdynpro application to react these events, or to handle these events within the webdynpro application. And finally, I would also make you understand how we can save this offline scenario and how we can upload the form into a webdynpro application. Upon uploading the form, how we can send this Adobe form as how we can save the data into the database, or how we can send this Adobe form as an attachment to the workflow. So I'll make you understand all these concepts in the next couple of sessions, or in the next 3 to 4 sessions, right? So to do that, to create a webdynpro application, the first thing that we are going to do is that we are going to navigate to ABAP workbench by executing the transaction SE80. And once you navigate to your transaction, ABAP workbench transaction, the first thing is that you are supposed to navigate to the package or the development class wherever you are trying to or planning to build the entire development objects with respect to the Adobe forms. So go ahead, and the first thing is that you have to create a component over here. As I said, we are going to embed the Adobe form into a webdynpro application. So the first thing is that we are supposed to create a component. So I'm going to create a component with name Z, let's say for example Z WDC underscore employee page, and this is just a piece of description that I've just given. So maintain appropriate descriptions based on the way how you are trying to build. The description should be very specific to the component or the process, whatever that you are going to build. And I just gave the name as window as default window, and I just gave the name of the view as v underscore main. I'm going to go ahead and create the package within the package. Just choose the respective appropriate package and transport request and save it. So here is where actually we are now inside the webdynpro application or webdynpro component. So the first thing is that we are supposed to navigate to the view where we are planning to embed the Adobe form. So just navigate to the view main. So here what we are trying to do is that we are trying to embed the Adobe form. So here we have to understand three things. So what kind of data that you want to include within the Adobe form, that we define under the context tab. So here we define the data that we want to place on the Adobe form, for example, or the fields or the input fields, whatever that we are the process needs to be placed on the form, or the business requirement may need to include the set of input fields, or maybe there could be a set of fields which they just want to make sure that it is non-editable, or it just be a display field, kind of static text. So you have to first get a good information about what should be the context of your data. So when I say context, the context is nothing but the data or the fields or the information, whatever that the business process is expecting to be included within the form. All right, so the first thing is that here we are supposed to create two nodes over here. So the first node would be your source for PDF. Basically, one thing you have to understand over here is that whenever we try to integrate or embed Adobe form within a webdynpro application, the PDF form is stored as a raw string. That means it can be a kind of alphanumeric key where your entire Adobe form is stored as a raw string. So you have to make the webdynpro application to understand that whatever the Adobe form that you are trying to design, whatever the Adobe form that you are planning to embed into the webdynpro application, it has to be the webdynpro component should understand this, like this is a layout or this is the form that it has to be embedded within the webdynpro application. So you have to create a node with cardinality 1:1, saying that the node name is PDF or PDF source. Let's make it as PDF and just keep the remaining fields or the input fields as it is. Don't change anything. Now inside this PDF, you again go ahead and create one attribute which is of type xstring. Basically, as I said, the raw string, basically the webdynpro component or the application looks for a raw string of your Adobe form, so it has to be a type of xstring. So once you have defined your context, one of the nodes as PDF source, what is the source or the source of the Adobe form, what is the source of the Adobe form that has to be embedded or integrated in the Dynpro application, that you have defined it. And the next thing is the data, which I was talking earlier about, what kind of information that business process is actually looking or expecting to be placed. So for this, I just go ahead and create a node with saying data, and let's say for example here I give as a employee, right? So here what I just did is that I already created a data dictionary table where we can just store employee information. This is just for the sake of understanding purpose, but in the real scenarios or in the real-time situations, probably we might be using some business related or process related data dictionary tables. Right, so I just go ahead and add the attributes. As you can see, we have three simple attributes over here, and I'm just going ahead and creating these attributes. And one more important thing is that the data node, all the nodes under the context should be of cardinality 1:1, irrespective, but maybe there can be a situation that you might have multi-line a kind of internal table where you want to populate this whole internal table into the Adobe form. So in that case, what would you do? So very simple, all is that you have to just create a sub node for this data which is of cardinality 1:1, and go ahead and define the node and change the cardinality of the sub node. What exactly I mean by saying this is that the primary node or the parent node should always the cardinality of this particular data node should always be 1:1. But however, there is a possibility, and it can be also defined that the sub nodes can have a different cardinality structure or definition. All right, so I actually want you to try from your end that how do you define a node with a different cardinality and how you can integrate this. However, in this process, anyways, we are in a couple of moments we are going to see that how we are going to access this context that we have defined in the Dynpro view in the Adobe form. So without any delay, as I said, we have just created one data node of cardinality 1:1, where we have just three simple attributes: employee ID, employee first name, and last name. Now all of that, we have to just save this information over here, and let's go back to the layout. So once we go back to the layout, basically here we just try to change the layout of the root UI element to matrix layout, and then I'm just going to include a page header with saying a page header over here, and I'll just try to create a kind of title over here, employee information, and let's click on this and enter. So once I click on this, so as you can see that the page header is now having the title as employee information. After this, this is next step is that you have to go ahead and include or insert a UI element, enp form, info, and you have to make sure that you embed or include the view content, Adobe interactive element. Here you have to make sure that you have included the interactive element over here. Yeah, so as you can see that interactive form is one UI element which is by default available in the library of Dynpro UI elements. So just go ahead and choose this interactive form and click on enter. So once you click on enter, obviously you have to make sure that the appropriate settings. So since we have defined the layout of the view as matrix layout, so go ahead and change the the property layout data property of the interactive form UI element to as matrix head data, so that it just comes to the next line. And moving ahead, as I said that we are supposed to integrate, we can set different properties over here. So how do we set the different properties over here for? the UI element, whatever that we are going to look at. So the first thing is that you have to make sure it is enabled in order to make sure that this form behaves as an online interactive form. That means when you make this form as enabled, the form, when the user executes this application and on the initial screen, or when for the first time he sees the application on the portal or the web, Internet Explorer or any client browser, so basically the form would be interactive. I mean, it is enabled, so a user can react or interact with the form so that they can start inserting the data, or they can make sure that they can submit the form. So they can actually interact with the form once you make sure that this enabled property is set as ABAP true or as enabled. Right, and the next thing is that you have to give the name of the form if in case what actually the file name basically is that, as I said, that there are 3 different scenarios over here, that online scenario, and 2 different scenarios. One is online scenario and other one is offline scenario. So in the case of offline scenario, when the user tries to click on the save button, which is available on the Adobe form, so what happens is that the system just proposes a default name to save the form onto the desktop. So that default file name can be written over here, or it can be even binded dynamically also. So whenever you see a button where you have a kind of buttons against the property, so that means it can be binded, and that means it can be dynamically populated at the runtime. So it is not really necessary that you have to always write directly over here or give a static file name, but rather it can also be generated or given dynamically. So I'm just giving a name over here saying that employee.pdf. Since we are developing the Adobe form, so obviously the output of this file would be in a .pdf format. And if in case you are looking to build a language, based on the language, you can just go ahead and give it. By default, the form language would be English, or the logon, or based on the user who logged into the, or based on the user credentials and user information, whatever that it has been stored and defined in the user master tables. And the next thing is that you have supposed to, as I said, that we have created a context, and we have to understand the webdynpro application, like what is the source Adobe form that it has to retrieve and place in the UI container element, whatever that we have included over here. So as I said, that you can just go ahead and click on the button which is against the PDF source, and you can see that in the context all the other elements are in the disable mode. Only the source, which is compatible with the property, is actually enabled. So as you can see, there's a kind of different, the elements, attributes of the 2 different nodes, appearance is entirely different. It looks brightly dark, and this looks a little bit dim colored, or in the gray color. So the reason is that, as I said, since a PDF source should be in the X string format or a raw string, so obviously this is a compatible data type for the property PDF source. So once you click on this PDF source, so as you can see that there is a binding exist. So that is one more important thing that you have to understand while defining. And if in case you want to just make it as a read-only property, that means the user is not supposed to enter or interact or change the data within the form, whatever that was included. So in that case, you can just make sure that it is a read-only property. And obviously the next thing would be your template source. So here is what actually you are supposed to do, and you can see a static Adobe form name that you are supposed to build. But as you can see that against the template source, you don't have a possibility of defining the template source dynamically. So because since there is no binding, so obviously here you have to just give the name of the form in a static value. Right, so I'm just going ahead and giving a static value over here, and I just gave the name. So as soon as I clicked on enter after providing the template source name, so obviously, as I said in the previous earlier sessions, that every form should be associated with the interface. And if we could recollect about the interface of type XML source, so that would be really great. If in case you forget about what is XML source interface type, or interface type of XML source. So I would request you to go back and check how does actually your interface of type XML source would be defined and looks like. However, since we are trying to build or embed Adobe form into a Dynpro application, so here you can just build even the interface and form in the forward navigation technique. Forward navigation technique is nothing but by the time when you are trying to define the source or information into the definition, in that case, if you don't have the the development objects readily available, so in that case you can just navigate forward and you can just build and come back to the place where actually you were left. All right, so here we are going to give a CFPI and employee info. So I just gave the name of the interface as employee info. Now how do I associate this context? So you might be in a kind of a question, having a question that how do I make sure that my Adobe form interface understands the context whatever that I defined in the Dynpro application. So here is a place where you are trying to make your Adobe form interface to understand that okay, this is the context that you're supposed to use in order to build the interface type, and later this interface will be used in the template source whatever that you have defined in the Dynpro application or in the UI container element property called template source. So here you have to just click on the context. So once you click on the context, as you can see now here, you can just go ahead and choose the data. So once you click on the data, the system proposes, okay, so in the just choose the appropriate package and save it, and now it is going to go ahead and create a form, and now the interface and form both are created. Now we are navigating to the Adobe form Adobe Lifecycle Designer. So as you can see that now we are inside the Adobe Lifecycle Designer. I'm sorry. So in the Adobe when we are inside the Adobe Lifecycle Designer, as you can see the form is still inactive. It is not yet active. And if you just want to understand what is the hierarchy or the context is, as you can see that the context whatever that we have defined in the view, we can just see the same set of elements or the attributes whatever that we have generated while creating the Adobe form interface. Now as you might be seeing that how this context has exported, or how this context has been imported by the Adobe form, where we are trying to define, where we have defined the context in the Dynpro view, and this context is also now available under the data view hierarchy of Adobe form. So it's all about your interface. As by this time you should be already aware of that. Without interface you can't build a form. So obviously there would be an interface which is actually helping us to pull out the information. So as you can see that the interface whatever that we gave to when we were trying to create the Adobe form, so the system prompted us to provide the name of the interface and the context that it has to use. So this is the name that we have just provided a few moments ago. So, and one more important thing that you have to understand over here is that once you save it, as you can see that the error, there is an error in the status bar saying that layout type unknown is no longer valid. So what you have to do over here is that you have to just make sure that you change the layout type as ZCI layout and you save it. So once you save it, so again it might ask you to include some sort of Dynpro script, which we are going to see in a couple of moments. So for time being, even our interface is not yet active. So what we are supposed to do is that we have to just double click by forward navigating. So we have just tried to navigate to the interface, and if you just go back to the properties of the interface, and you can see that it's XML schema based interface, which I was just making you to understand in one of the earlier sessions, that how do we create an interface of type XML schema based interface and how does it look like. I have already made you understand like what is the XML interface type, schema based interface type, and how does it look like, and how can we directly upload this interface, and how can we create an interface independently without making use of any Web-Dynpro context. I've already made shown in one of the earlier sessions. So now what does that all is that you have to just save this, and and you have to just activate it. So once you activate it, as you can see that we are just now going to go ahead and activate the without and you can also check for the consistencies. As you can see, there are no more errors within the interface, and this has been generated by your forward navigation technique. So we just created this, and now we are going to save this, and we are going to check again. There are no more errors over here, and if in case you want to provide some kind of description to the form and interface, you can go ahead and define your both descriptions for both form and interface. Now we are navigating to the layout. So the first thing is that how do we place these information, the fields or whatever that we are expecting. So what all is that, there are two possibilities. As I said that earlier, I just tried to make you understand that how do we create custom elements. Here actually I'm not trying to I'm not going to build again a form which is having a good look and feel, and I'm not trying to concentrate more on the cosmetic changes. Rather than I would be interested in how do we define how do we place the context, whatever that was defined or embedded or included in the Adobe form interface. So earlier we also seen that how data binding can be defined to the fields or the library elements that are by default available. So here the other way of defining binding is that you can just directly drag and drop your Adobe fields, and you can just go ahead and place these in the Adobe form, and as you can see, as soon as you just place it, the binding of the field is directly defined. So if in case you are not sure that what kind of record or how do I define a binding, where can I see the binding tab and everything, you can just go ahead and choose the palettes tab, and make sure you just click on the reset palettes. All right, and if in case this is placed reset palettes location, and if in case you are pretty sure that what kind of binding definition that each field has to occur, so in that case you can just make use of some of the standard elements that are available in the library, and maybe you can just define the binding. But however, I've already made you understand that how actually we define a binding independently without making use of fields or the data view hierarchy structure. So now in this case I was just making you understand how binding can be directly defined without any navigating back to the different palettes and trying to understand how do we define binding in the or where do we have to find the binding tab to define the binding. So here you can see that as soon as I just tried to drag and drop, my binding definition has been enabled and defined for the fields. Now I'm just going ahead and placing these fields in a sequential order. So as I said, I'm not really looking to build a very hi-fi form or a very form where you have all the cosmetic changes and layout properties and etc. So I'm just placing all these three elements. And the next important thing that you have to remember whenever you are trying to include a Web-Dynpro Adobe form is that you have to insert a script for a Web-Dynpro. So this is the place where this is one more important thing that you have to make sure that whenever you are trying to integrate Adobe form with a Web-Dynpro application, you have to make sure that you have to include the Web-Dynpro script. So once you include the Web-Dynpro script, so now you can see that there is a kind of scripting which has been included in the hierarchy view of the Adobe form. So earlier it was not there, it was not available, but as soon as I just try to include the insert webdynpro script, so it has actually included one more hierarchy structure node, or the DOM structure for with respect to the the webdynpro script. So basically this webdynpro scripts helps to understand the events, whatever the events that you raise or fire on the Adobe form, it will be transmitted to the to the webdynpro application event handler. So if you just try to observe, when we were trying to create or include the UI element interactive form, there is a section called events. So basically interactive form can have two different events, on submit, and there is one more event which I'll be trying to show you in a couple of moments. So once we navigate back to the webdynpro application, again we can see what are those events, but there is one event which we say that on submit. So if in case you want to place some buttons and you want to handle some business process or validations on clicking on the submit button, which you can place by using the webdynpro library, which I was just trying to show you over here currently, is that you have a webdynpro library where you can just drag and drop the webdynpro specific UI library fields or UI elements. Here so once you click on the submit button, so basically you can see that this particular, on click of this button, so you can handle the event or action on this button in the webdynpro application, so which I'll be trying to show you in a couple of moments again. So let's save this form, and so let's try to activate this form. And I'm sorry, there is one more important thing that I have to show you, that once you click on the interface, so basically you have make sure that whenever you try to include this insert webdynpro script, so always the script has to run at the client location, right? So what you can do is that the client is nothing but the place where actually your the script would be executed, which would be your browser. So the client is nothing but here the browser. It is not the application but the browser. So the entire script, whatever that you define, it will be executed at the client level, which would be running at the browser. So right, it can be either browser or it can be even an application, right? So so once we are done with this, so all of that you have to just activate it. So once I activate it, so I've just activated the Adobe form, whatever that I've created by using the forward navigation technique. Now the next thing is that you might be in a situation that before inserting the data, if you want to perform something within the within the form, so everything has to be actually included in the webdynpro application. So all the validations, the determinations and actions that you want to perform, everything should be handled from your webdynpro component itself. So here you can see that in the properties tab, once you navigate the layout, actually when you just try to choose the interface as SFPI or interface which is of type XML schema based, you won't be able to see any kind of place where you can just go ahead and define your initialization logics within the Adobe form, right? So even you can see over here we just have a definition of the entire database object or entire context. So but here we don't have a possibility of defining the validations within the form level itself. So obviously the only place where you can handle the validations or preliminary determinations or initializations would be your the webdynpro component. So make sure that whenever you want to handle this kind of operations, all the operations has to be handled from the webdynpro component level. Now going back to our webdynpro application, so let's navigate back to our webdynpro application. It's very simple. All I have to just go back and click on this, and my Adobe form and my PDF source, everything is ready. Now it's just about I have to just execute this form. So before that, again, I wanted to show you, let's try to execute this form, and let's try to see how it looks like from a runtime point of view. So to do that, we have to activate this component. So let's go back and activate this component. Activating the component, it's very simple. All I have to just navigate to the component and click on activate. So it just, all right, so I'm just in a currently editable mode, so that is the reason it has given me a warning, and I have just tried to change this to a display mode and non-editable mode, and I'm trying to activate it. So the component is now getting activated. I don't have to define anything in the window definition of the webdynpro component, because by default when I create a window, my main view is already included in the as a default startup page or default view. So I don't have to define anything in the default window. But if in case you are trying to build different views, so make sure that you navigate to the Windows section of the component and make sure you have defined the appropriate inbound and outbound flags, and you try to maintain the whole flow of your entire application structure, right? So without any delay, now we are going to go ahead and create an application for this employee page. So all is that I have to just right click on this, and I have to just go ahead and create a webdynpro application. So what I'll do is that I'll just give the name as ZWDA, and I just try to save this. So if in case you have multiple windows, so make sure that you just choose the appropriate interface type over here, interface view, which would be your window name. So if in case you have multiple windows, in that case you have to use it. And in the same way, you have to use different plug if in case you it is not the default plugin name. So make sure that you try to give the appropriate interface view and plugin name. So now let's save this and activate this. Let's save this and execute this application. So once I execute this application, I should be able to see the form in the webdynpro application. So as expected, so the application should display as the form. So now it is in the process of retrieving the data, and now you can see that my Adobe form has been displayed. Now there might be a question that what is the size and how do I increment the size? So to do this, it's very simple. Just go back to your view and just make sure that whenever you have just choose the appropriate view type, view, and navigate to that view. And what you can just do is that you just have to change from display mode to editable mode. So once you are in the editable mode, go back to the properties and increase the height, let's say to 600, and the width would be 100%. Here it is actually 300 pixels. I would make it as 100% width. And as I said that the events, there are two different events that you can handle from within the webdynpro component with respect to the interactive form UI element. Now you can see under the event section you have two different events, on error and on submit. So once you click on the on submit button, so basically you can handle on submit button on the Adobe form. So the action handler can be defined under your webdynpro actions or the view actions. All right, so now let's save this and activate this view so that now this is activated. Now let's go back to the webdynpro application and refresh this. So once I refresh it, I should be able to see the changeable height and width options, the values. Now my webdynpro Adobe form, the Adobe form, whatever that I have integrated into the webdynpro component should be initialized, and it should be displayed in a couple of seconds. So I guess it's taking some time. Let's try to refresh it one more time. And yeah, this time it shows up. So yeah, so this is what so we have placed 3 different forms over here, and we just try to place the fields, whatever that we just tried to place in the Adobe form, all the pages are actually displayed. So in case if you don't want to highlight, since we made the property as enabled, so that is the reason we are able to interact with the Adobe forms. All right, so you can just highlight, or you can just hide the toolbar, and you can even hide the navigation pan. So yeah, I can see that now you will be able to even save the applications by clicking on this save button, which is available on the Adobe form. All right, so that's what I wanted to show you in this session, that how we can build and embed Adobe form in the webdynpro application, and what are the important points or prerequisites that you have to consider while integrating Adobe form into a webdynpro application. And also I just tried to start up with how exactly an online form looks like. So the simple idea over here, what would be the next steps in integrating this application, would be that probably the business users or process or the customer might be trying to integrate this webdynpro application into a portal by creating a iView, and this particular iView will be provided as a service, and later employees, when they log into the portal and navigate to the employee services or business services, so they can just navigate to this application by executing the link, whatever that is configured with respect to this particular iView in the portal. And then what they do is that they just start filling the form. And if in case they want to submit this form, so as I said, we might be including, you can just go ahead and include the buttons which are from the webdynpro ActiveX library. You just go ahead and include the buttons over here and handle the event or action from your webdynpro component. So this is an online scenario. So here still we are not trying to save the form on the desktop, and which I would like to show you in the next session. All right, so thank you very